Need two more senators, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll get started in just a minute.
I gotta keep my eye on the gas. I learned that long ago. I slept last night. I fell asleep on the couch about 9.
Then we need two more senators. See a couple of senators in the hall. Send them in. Need one. Sit up here when we get started. You gonna sit up here when we get started? Yeah.
Senator Gooch, there you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a quorum, so we're going to get started. I'm happy to come to you this morning with the 2014 amended state budget. I tell you that the subcommittees have spent some time on this, and I want to thank subcommittee chairs. As you know, we had some joint subcommittee hearings with the House in an effort to expedite the process, and frankly, it was simpler this year. The good news is when you're not cutting budgets, it probably doesn't require as much time to consider, and that's a good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that this budget reflects a small addition this year. Actually, you're going to get a list of changes for the floor that I'll bring to you, but the actual changes between the House and the Senate, only about 3 pages of our budget pages. There are not very many at all. The House didn't make very many changes from the governor's budget. The governor didn't do an awful lot that was new, and that's actually our philosophy. If you go on the SBEO website, you'll find something called Principles of Budgeting by the Georgia State Senate. It's something we adopted several years ago about what we believe in budgeting. And one of the points that we make in here, number 7, is limited mid-year adjustments. And it says that limited year adjustments should fund emergencies, constitutional items, or critical needs. We believe that the battles over new spending and new initiatives generally should be done in the general budget, so that all the needs and all the applications can compete equally. It's not to say there aren't some from time to time, but generally that's our philosophy, and I think this budget is a good example of basically a truing up of the general budget for 2014, and the governor has been true to that principle, and the House has as well, and I believe that we're following that same principle as well. Governor Deal has presented an amended budget that has limited changes and follows these principles we just discussed as well. So here are some of the highlights. First of all, the way I'm going to do this, I'll talk a few minutes about the highlights of the governor's budget that we all agreed to, the House and Senate agreed to, and they're all in your budget. And then I'll discuss the changes that the House made, the ones we agreed to, and the ones that we have Senate changes to as well. So kind of a 3-stage operation. I'd be glad to answer any questions we have at the right time. We've got the folks here that can help answer them as well. The total admitted budget is $20.2 billion. It records lottery revenues of $910.8 million and motor fuel taxes of $993.4 million. And so it adds about $313.9 million. Out of that $313 million, the largest single item is $134.7 million for education, and the biggest piece of that, some $130.5 million, is for the mid-year education adjustment, which reflects the count that was made, the FTE count made back in October. It trues up the FTE funding for this school year. Some of the highlights of the governor's budget is some $14.4 million in state funds and $1.5 million for the state match for the private non-deemed hospitals that are eligible for the disproportionate share program. We have a list of those hospitals as well. We do this every year, the amended budget. You may remember we passed legislation last year that changes, it creates the boards of dentistry and pharmacy. So we have funding in there in the amended budget to meet those costs of those new boards. They will be offset by fees that will be forthcoming, but the fees, I believe, go into the treasury, and the budget for the boards actually comes out of the budget, but is replaced by fees that come in on the general budget as well. There's $130,000 for implementation of the pain management clinic licensure. That's a pretty important thing that we've started. There's $26.9 million in cost for Medicaid Peach Care for compliance with the national health care. There are some costs to it, and I invite you to look at those costs as well. Those include the cost of what we call the woodwork effect, the 12-month Medicaid review change from 6 months, and this premium tax that we're having to pay on CMOs as well. On the state health benefit plan, it's about $26.4 million, again, in costs that are associated with requirements of the Affordable Care Act. Those had to do with individual mandates, additional preventive health benefits, and a comparative effectiveness research fee. It's about $58 million, as you remember last week when the Department of Community Health Board announced changes to the state health benefit plan. The announced cost of those changes is, I think, $116 million. Since they operate on a calendar year, there's 6 months of funding for those changes in this budget at $58 million. Economic development, the governor's proposed $15 million for the One Georgia Authority and $10 million more for the Department of Economic Development for REBA funds. And as you know, REBA funds are Regional Economic Business Assistance, or deal maker funds. These go along with what we've already appropriated, and we want to continue to position the state to take advantage of opportunities for new industry and new jobs to be created. Our department and the governor has been very active and very successful in this past year. I think y'all seen the numbers that are floating around, so we want to support that effort, and those funds are in this budget. He proposed them, and the House and Senate both agreed to them. Also, the governor placed some $25 million in One Georgia, but it's going to be directed at school systems around the state. And this, and I'm not an expert on this, but this is to help bring, and it's a result of the digital learning task force that the governor had this past year. And the intention is to bring all school systems in the state up to the level of having connectivity to the internet, connectivity to high-speed internet, so that we can proceed down the road of every system in the state having the opportunity to introduce technology into the classroom. I feel like that's the future in education. When we studied it with the Education Commission a couple of years ago, or last year, I guess, we found that there was just a wide range of where systems were. Some systems were already on board and using it. Some systems couldn't get the technology they didn't have the money to spend to get that last mile of connectivity. What this $25 million we think will buy us is pretty much statewide, will bring 2 years worth of improvements in 1 year. And we think that's a great achievement. We have to salute the governor for doing that. So we left those funds in there as well. Those are actually the highlights of the governor's budget that were not either changed or added to by the House. So I'll take a few minutes and I'll give you an item number that ties to either a House or Senate change as well. There are some changes in the judicial budget where, and as most of you know, and maybe not, but the judicial budget being a budget of the third leg of state government, constitutionally separate. That budget's not reviewed by the governor, so the legislature is the only reviewing authority for anything that's added to or changed in the judicial budget. So you may see more changes in those budget items than you might see in maybe a legislative or a executive branch office as well. So there's several changes there. The Senate agreed and adds to some changes in the legislature. General Assembly joint offices in ancillary activities and fiscal office. It's a transfer. It's not an addition. It's just a transfer of fees. That's 6.100 and 7.100. Court of Appeals, we agreed with zeroing out a couple of ads in 14.1 and 14.2. Same in 15.1. The Judicial Council, we agreed to zero out an ad on 15.1, but we disagreed to an ad in 17.1 and zeroed that one out as well. In Judicial Council 18.1, we agreed with a slight change in an ad there from 120,000 to 105,631, and we zeroed out 18.2 and agreed with the House on that zero, and then 18.3 we believe that oversight of misdemeanor probation providers might be a pretty good idea, and so we went back to the Judicial Council's position of 16,000 to increase funds for that. So we disagreed with the House on that particular ad. Prosecuting attorneys, we did not agree, or we did agree with the House to not fund travel and training for district attorneys. Same 26.1 and 26.2 under Superior Court judges. The House zeroed out those ads, and we agreed with that as well. 27.1 and 27.1, we agreed with the zero on an ad there under Superior Courts. 27.2, we did not agree, or we did not agree with an ad there, and we zeroed that one out. 27.3, we agreed with a zero there as well. 28.1, we did not agree to an increase there. House did not agree as well, so we zeroed those out. 29.1, on the Supreme Court, we agreed with the House on a cut that wasn't quite as much as they asked for, or on an ad that wasn't quite as much as they asked for, $12,000. We found a little additional cut in the Aviation Authority, 41.1. The governor and the House had agreed to a cut of 81,000 based on flying hours. We found a little more leeway there, and we've got a slight increase of some 25,000 up to $106,000 cut. The compensation resolution that was not funded last year, the bill I think still has not passed. Apparently the cost of the annuity has gone down. The House corrected that amount. So if the bill passes, the annuity would be $326,593 rather than $400,000. But that's the actual cost of the amount that's in the bill. The bill is still, I think, in the House. If you may remember, we amended it over here in the Senate and sent it back to the House and did not act on it by the end. So it's still over there. If that bill does not pass, then these funds will not be spent. 54.1 is funding that we had in the general budget for Rockdale Cares. It's a facility for disabled people that helps the daycare facility. They had a cut of $50,000. We restored those funds. I had a couple of senators very interested in that as well. 59.1 was a $30,000 ad that the House made having to do with a match that Emory needs for the autism activities that have been transferred from the Marcus Institute. Turns out they don't need those matching funds in this budget. There'll be some discussion in the 15 budget, so we zeroed out that ad. 86.1 basically are just truing up the numbers. The Indigent Care Trust Fund, there's no great change there, just later data as far as numbers are concerned. On 88.1 under Medicaid, you'll see some slight changes. These are basically later data that indicate the cut that was taken because of lower growth in plan in Medicaid as well. 90.6 under State Health Benefit Plan, there's one change in truing up the numbers there. Again, it's just later information. As the department gets new information, as we examine it, we just change these numbers. It's only a couple $1 million difference right there. 90.7 is the change for the $58 million, 90.7, 90.8. There was a reserve created, total $158 million. The $58 million we need for the changes to the state health benefit plan was taken out of that reserve, and you'll see that in 90.7 reduction of the reserve and 90.8 funding the changes to the plan as well. 97.2 is a replacement of $10,000. We had earlier put those funds in last year for the implement the Georgia Cosmetic Laser Services Act. This is for the administration of oversight of those activities. Did not survive conference last year, so at the request of the senator, we re-put those funds in for this budget to get that oversight started, and then we'll look at it in 15 if it survives the conference committee. Under drugs and narcotics, we had a recommendation over in the House and from subcommittee as well to add an inspector position with the Drugs and Narcotics Agency. And there again, in looking at this late in the year, not real sure what this actually would get us. We zeroed out that ad, 98.1. In corrections, just kind of give you an overall view into some changes there. The jail population in the state has been the lowest number in years, and the amount that we had budgeted for the jail subsidy, that's the amount the state pays for each day that they house a state prisoner prior to them picking them up after conviction. What had happened in the governor's budget, they allowed them to take $5 million in cuts and then distribute it out through a number of agencies inside the Department of Corrections. The House reduced those kept the $5 million cut, but reduced the additions by somewhere under $1 million, and used those funds in other parts of the budget. What we did is, based on new information that we received from the Department of Corrections, we had to find a $2 million ad, and the short version is Corrections has been using a federal program called a 340B pharmaceutical pricing program, where they buy certain expensive drugs at a very reduced rate. It's very expensive. These are very expensive drugs. the Federal Human Services Agency has disallowed Georgia Regents. Georgia Regents handles health care, as you probably know, for the Department of Corrections, has disallowed their eligibility in that program. And while they may recover it later on, presently they're having to refund previous discounts taken. That's a $4 million cut. It's a $4 million problem in the 15 budget as well for the Department of Corrections. So in conferring with OPB, we created a $2 million ad to help replace those funds and basically increase the cut to the jail subsidy program, which it looks like they can take. As I said, the numbers in county jails around the state are at the lowest in a long, long time. So that's how we handle it. That's all these changes you'll see. We restored the cuts. We agree with the House on the cuts in some of the agencies, except in prisons, and any funds we had left over, we restore those to the state prisons program, believing that that's the most important thing that they do. So if they go down these items, we'll either agree or not agree, but that's the philosophy behind all of it as well. Food and Farm, it was a slight cut from the House of the governor's addition. The governor had 12,370 added. The House cut that to 10,538. We agree with that. Under prison health, the House reduced the ad from 58,100 to 43,984. We agreed with that as well. 104.2 is the item we added for the replacement of the funds for the pharmaceuticals. That's a $2 million ad there. Under 105.1, Governor had an ad of 44,001, and the House cut it to 39,096. We agreed with the House of that. Agreed with them on the cut, on the reduction of the ad in 107.1, and then the difference is in 108.1. That's the state prisons program. The Governor had an ad of 3,057,493. House cut that to 2.393. We cut that. We restored all but about 300,000. So our ad is 2.738488. Same on the 109.1. That's a restoration. We agree with the House on a slight decrease in the ad there. We're almost through. 110.1 is a position the Department of Defense is applied for and has funded and has already hired, having to do with a legal position. And Governor recommended $180,063. House did not fund it. The Senate restored it, but we moved it to the military readiness program, which is where the Department of Defense wants it. And we'd be glad to discuss that, but we think that's a valid ad. 127.1 is a request of a senator who's immersed in Civil War activities in his part of the state. We've added funds for the Georgia Civil War Commission as they're participating in the sesquicentennial that's ongoing. 128.1, funds that were added for extended day and extended year in the agricultural education, 158,319. We agree with the House ad on that. There are three ads in the education budget that have to do with correcting errors and/or mistakes and for various reasons. I'm not going to go very deeply in it, but just tell you that the House added some $294,415 for enrollment of programmatic changes for Devereaux Ackerman Academy and Murphy Harts Academy. These residential treatment centers that went from either a half a day to full day on one, or in the other one added new beds. So these are changes that occurred within this budget year that basically are funding the educational costs at those facilities. So it's additional children or additional time is earning additional funds, and we put that in. And 142.1 is Ware County. It's a millage error, and we've corrected that. And this House had added 890. 421, we agree with that ad. 143.2 has to do with Troup County Schools, and I want to thank Senator Tippins, who's the subcommittee chair and a former school board member, for delving into this situation. It's fairly complicated, but we won't take your time this morning to go very deeply into it, but it has to do with these payment in lieu of taxes and how they're treated in the tax digest, and how the payments that are in lieu of taxes affect how they're reflected as well. We became pretty convinced that based on what we're doing right now, Troup County is due these funds. But we believe that all of these situations, all three of these deserve some study. And we have suggested, and I'll be dropping a study committee, joint study, House Senate Study Committee resolution in the next day or two that will start to look at these errors that we seem to be doing every year that have to do with count errors and so forth, and see if we can establish some policy. I don't think anybody wants to deprive a school system of the funds they need, but we need to establish what's an error and whose fault is it, and at what point does it become the state's problem when we've already distributed the QBE funds or the equalization funds or whatever the fund is. So we agree with the House on these ads. We just think that this whole situation deserves some further study. Okay, adjustments in education and QBE program, we agree with the House on 144.2 and 144.4. The third change having to do with FTE counties in 144.6 in Tift Academy and Provost Academy. These had to do with the difference in the rate between special needs. There was a count error they were submitted as regular students when they really were EIP students, so the amount that they should have earned was shorted. Extended day in 150.1 restores previous reductions of 158,319. We agree with the House there. 169.1 is just a date error that we corrected. 199.1 is Warm Springs continues to convert to using Georgia Regents as the operations of the hospital there, and the agreement was we believe was $5 million in costs, and came across at 5.4, and so we returned the amount we thought we'd agreed to, and that was $5 million. 212.1 Department of Juvenile Justice. This is a 3% adjustment for out of home care providers that providers in the Department of Human Services have already received. These out-of-home providers had not received it, so it basically matches up the small increase there. 260.1 is an ad for Joshua's Law of some $30,000 for the planning there. We agree with that ad by the House. 261.1 is Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. The governor had said replace funds for operations with fee funds. The House disagreed with that and replaced the funds with budget funds. We went back to the governor's position. They raised some $732,000 in fees last year. They're already at $396,000 this year. We think the governor's right on that projection. 290.1 is forest land protection grants. This is, you'll hear about this at home. This is the promise we made to replace some of those county funds that are taken out by the forest land protection grants. This is $26 million. The number changed a little bit from the governor's number from 25.6 to 26.1. That's just truing it up on later data. 314.1 is the engineering scholarship under the student finance subcommittee came up with a truing up number that actually matches the number of scholarships we're giving there. So $83,500. 341.1 is an emergency repair of a rail line down in Scriven County. There are several businesses that ship huge amounts of grain out from along that line. It's the only line that runs in that area, and most of that is for export. And so this was pretty much an emergency situation. DOT did not have, well, they had the funds, but they were obligated to other places. So basically, DOT was going ahead with this emergency repair, and we were replacing the funds for them. The last thing is the section on bonds, and just what I would tell you is that the bond there's no new bonds added. It's basically within the agency redirecting previously unissued bonds into other areas, and it's basically within their own agency, so we've agreed with that. The governor proposed it, the House didn't change it, and we agreed with the House as well. So that's maybe a little more than we usually try to go into detail, but I wanted you to have an opportunity by number to look, and if you have any questions this time, we'll certainly entertain them. We've got Melody Debussy, our budget director, up here as well, and anything I don't know, she'll know right away. All right. There we go. All right, Senator, go ahead. You're on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The 199, the warm springs, did we cut that out of the budget last year? I know I got an email from persons that asked me about
We added it.
about the facilities closing. Did we add it back this time, or what? They wanted to make sure that they were able to go there, and for some reasons, I guess funds were cut, or what?
And Senator Underman may want to jump in, but what they have done, they were going to close a year ago. They were going to close altogether. We funded additional funds to keep them going, but what they've done is change their mission. And what you may be hearing is patients who were going there for outpatient treatment, they've become a regular hospital under Georgia Regents now, and they're not doing outpatient work for other patients. They should go to a regular hospital for their treatment as well. But the Warm Springs is being funded under this new alignment with Georgia Regents, and they believe they have a mission that will bring in the type of patients that they're looking for, those with disabilities, those who need medical treatment that they actually are designed to perform. But what you may hear are complaints from those who were going there for outpatient treatment, and they're not in that business anymore. They were losing money hand and fist.
Okay, very good. And then the final one, I think we talked about the Medicaid, low income. So we're cutting some on that, but nothing has been cut for the aged, blind, and disabled. Is that right? Oh.
Without looking at it, all of it, that's an entitlement. So nothing has been cut. If the numbers change, it's simply because the demand for services went down under their projections. They project how much they need. We budget to that. Then they true it up at the end of the year and amend the budget, and that's what we're doing in this budget. But there's no reduction because it's an entitlement. They get it. They get it by applying.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Well, once again, I thank the subcommittee chairs and everybody who's participated. We've got a big job ahead of us in the 15 budget. The House is moving along very well in that process, and we believe we'll have a budget in our hands a little over a week from now, with a big budget. So we need to start to work immediately on the general budget for the FY15. So if there's no further discussion or questions, I'll entertain a motion. A motion. Question or motion?
He said second.
Question. Okay. What?
Mr. Chairman, do you believe we ever spent all night trying to get agreement with the House on budget days at a time? And now it seems to work.
Well, I'd say this: we've come a long way, but everybody does seem to be trying to work together now. And you know, the state. You know, you hear all kinds of things, but if y'all read my 10 reasons to be optimistic about 2014, you look at what's going on out there, and you look at all the numbers, and this state's moving in the right direction. We have good, solid reasons to believe we're beginning to outgrow the national economy in Georgia. That's the signal we've been looking for. So I think that you know, our budget process kind of reflects that, and we've got great leadership over in the House, and with the support of you all here, I think that we seem to be more in tune with some sort of common goal now than we ever have before. I know you've been here years that wasn't true, and stayed up all night with us. And I hope we'll get it done during a regular day this year. Anyone else? All right, we have a motion and a second. Who was the second? Senator Mullis? Senator Gooch was a motion to pass the 2014 amended budget on to the floor, or to the Rules Committee to assign to the floor. Is there other discussion on that motion? All right, all in favor of it, please raise your hand. Very good. And all opposed? Very good. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate the time.
I had to make the motion, or at least a second. Did you get my text?
I can't.
That's all right. I just said